Hi everyone. The following video was shot originally with the FileMaker 15 platform. However, it's important to note that none of the material has changed with FileMaker 16, and as a result, this video is very appropriate for learning about SSL certificates with your FileMaker server. Now, after this video was shot, FileMaker released the FileMaker Cloud product, which is really a second server option. And the SSL setup on that is a little bit different. So understand that the concepts are all the same, but for FileMaker Cloud, the setup is a little different. So just keep that in mind. Hi everyone, this is Richard Carlton. Welcome to another awesome video. And as you'll notice in a lot of the videos, we actually do a lot of the video presentations ourselves, but we frequently bring in expert talent for people who are experts in areas where frequently I just don't have that depth of knowledge. And I'm happy to bring in these people to help educate you, and myself for that matter, on all the ins and outs of the FileMaker platform. Now, today we have Klaus Levent from Data Maniacs. I like to say Data Maniacs. Hey Klaus, how are you?
Hey Richard, how are you?
We're doing great, and I'm glad you're here. And so what are we working on today, Klaus?
We are going to talk about SSL certificates in FileMaker Server 15 and the new abilities we got with the Server 15.
So along the way, I'm going to ask some questions, Klaus, that I know people at home are thinking about. And so first thing I want to ask is, SSL certificate, this has to do with encryption, right? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, we are talking about the encryption over the connection between the FileMaker client and the FileMaker server.
Okay, so we're talking about if I'm connected with FileMaker Pro to server, or with maybe FileMaker Go on an iPad, that's the same thing, right? We're talking about the same thing?
Yeah, we're talking about the same thing.
Okay.
As well as actually WebDirect.
Oh, as WebDirect as well. That's great. So between the web browser and the FileMaker server. Now let me ask a question, because there's a lot of encryptions. We hear about encryption this and lots of encryption. So this is the encryption over the wire. Is this the same as the encryption when people say, well, I want to encrypt my FileMaker file?
No, it's not the same, because encryption at rest, that is a relatively new feature in FileMaker, is an encryption that goes on directly in the file, and that does not need an SSL certificate in order to verify that the connection is there. You only need the encryption password in order to unlock the encrypted file.
Okay, great. So this is purely the conversation about the communication between the clients and the servers being encrypted. Well, that's great.
So what we are going to cover now is just an overview of what's new with FileMaker Server 15 in regards of SSL. Then we are talking about the DNS, what is it, and we are going to explain that part more in depth for especially beginners to this. So if you know all about DNS, you can just skip that, but that's actually an integrated part of understanding the SSL. And then we are going through what is the in and outs of SSL, and how does it work, and what's the new things in FileMaker Server 15 that gives us new abilities. And then at the end, there's just small bonus info. So what's new with SSL in FileMaker Server 15? Well, if you watched previous videos we created on FileMaker Server 14, you will know that we needed to install the certificates via the terminal command. But now we actually got the features right within the server admin console, so now it's much more easy to install. Another great new addition is the support for Wildcard and SAN and more vendors and types of certificates. And there's also support for intermediate certificates. So these are probably terms or terminology that you are not overly familiar with, but we'll get back to that just in a minute. I'd like to start off with talking a little bit about DNS. So we have some clients that needs to connect to a server, either via WAN IP or LAN IP addresses. So the client has a DNS client service that the client is asking for the IP address, and that goes on by asking for a domain name, let's say google.com, and say, yeah, I need to connect to a server that answers on the domain name google.com. But all servers on the internet has an IP address. So that domain name, that common name that everybody can remember, needs to be translated into an IP address. So that's what the DNS service system is actually doing. So first of all, our client is asking for the IP address of google.com, and it's asking the DNS client service, which will, or with this example, mycompany.com. So the DNS client service is asking the top level domain controller for where to find mycompany.com or find DNS information about mycompany.com. Now, a top-level domain controller is an authority that controls all domain names for a particular type of domain. So in this case, the client service is asking the TLD for .com domains about where to find mycompany.com information. So the top-level domain names answer that request and say, okay, you can go and ask this public DNS server at this IP address. So now the client knows that it needs to ask a public DNS server. And with the public DNS server, we are talking about a server that is public on the internet. And then the client service can ask the public DNS server, what is the WAN IP of mycompany.com? And then it gets a response with the IP address, so the client can connect to the WAN IP. So this is actually the basic steps for connecting to a server via domain name. Now, if you're sitting inside a local area network, let's say in an office, and you want to connect to mycompany.com, and the server is sitting inside the same local area network as the client, there can be very good reasons to set up a private DNS server, which is a DNS server just like the public DNS server, but it's a server that sits inside your local area network. And then it comes, instead of asking the public DNS server, your DNS client service knows that mycompany.com is actually listed on the private DNS server. So instead of going out to the public and ask for the IP address for the server we want to connect to, we are just asking the private DNS server, which will respond and give you the local area network IP address. So the local IP address of the server is what you get a response with, and you connect directly this way. So if you're sitting in a office and stuff like that, where you have a private DNS server, then you're probably connecting directly via the local IP address and never go out on the internet for that request. So this is basically how the DNS works. It works with asking about the domain names, and then you get an answer of an IP address back. So this is basically how the DNS system works. And that is very useful information when you need to grasp your head around how the SSL service is working. So let's take a look at what's new with the FileMaker Server 15 and SSL. Now, one of the great new things is that we can install the certificates directly with the server admin console, so you don't need to install via the command line. Everything is happening via the admin console, and that is really, really great because it gives us an easier way of understanding the process, and you don't need to write commands and run those.
So let me ask a question here, just to clarify. So this is one of the main big differences between the 14 product and Server 15, is that we actually have this sort of integrated built-in certificate installation, correct?
That's right. That's really one of the really great things. And it's not just a replacement for the installation method of FileMaker Server 14, but it actually has some more things included because it supports more things, which we'll get back to. So another great addition to FileMaker Server 15 is the support for certificates. And now we got support for Wildcard, SAN, and more vendors and types. And make sure that you check FileMaker's knowledge base for supported certificates, because it's not everything that is supported, but in 15 it's much more than it used to be in 14. And we'll get back to the types. So just to recap how this SSL certificates work. We have a FileMaker server that consists of a FileMaker server database engine and a web server engine, which is Apache or IIS for Windows. These are the two main components that is in play when we are talking about SSL certificates. So we need a certificate in order to validate that the server is who it says it is. So the certificate is basically something like when you get a passport. You can get a passport with your name and image and say, I am who I say I am. But it doesn't validate that very good if the certificate or the passport is not issued by a trusted issuer. So for your passport, a trusted issuer is of course the government who issue your passport and validates that yes, you are in fact who you say you are. With servers, it's actually a similar situation. As a server, you need to be verified that you are actually who you say you are. And that is done with the SSL certificates. So the certificate is something that needs to be issued by a trusted issuer. So that's a certificate authority is the term, or CA basically. And for the FileMaker server, we need to install a certificate for the FileMaker server database engine, and we also need to install a certificate for the web server engine, whether it's Apache or IIS for Windows. The great thing though, I just want to mention right here, is that FileMaker server admin console takes care of installing the same certificates onto both the database engine and the web server engine. So it's a one-step process instead of having to install it multiple places.
Let me go ahead and ask a question here. We talk about a certificate, is it like a piece of paper with a gold star on it? I mean, I know what a FileMaker server is, and people understand it's a machine and it's got this FileMaker server software on it. What is this green thing that's on the screen? What is a certificate?
Yeah, a certificate is basically a digital file that has some keys within it, encrypted keys, that validates that this certificate is actually valid. So you can think of it like a watermark in your notes, or it could be like the hologram in your passport. It's kind of a certain key that is you can validate. It's something that you cannot forge.
Okay, but if you physically saw a certificate and you looked at it on your computer, it looks a lot like just a text file, right? A single text file?
Yeah, exactly. And when we get to the process, I'm actually showing what the file looks like inside.
Okay.
So we are going to look at that just later in this video.
Well, the issue is people talk to us all the time, and we talk about these things kind of esoteric, and they're out there kind of floating, kind of almost imaginary, right? And I like to show people literally what a certificate is. It's a really, really special text file that you have to go and procure, and you can't really fake it. That's the whole reason why it is what it is. It's special. It's specific to you. But at the end of the day, it's really, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a text file, a very special text file.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have the certificate authority that issues these certificates. Now, one of the things that many certificate authorities is doing at the moment is to increase the security. Now, a certificate authority has something called root certificates, which is basically a really, really secure file that really verifies that they are who they are and they are trusted. And the certificate authorities needs to protect those root certificates very strongly, because with the root certificates you can issue SSL certificates, and then it cannot be really trusted if someone malicious gets their hands on those root certificates. So in order to strengthen the security, many certificate authorities are using something called intermediate certificates. So it's used by the root certificate authorities, but some of these certificate authorities also have kind of resellers. And a reseller also needs to verify that they are who they say they are. But they are intermediate between the certificate authority and the certificate or the client itself. So this is something that is going on now, that many is using the intermediate certificates. And those gets in between the authority and the certificate. So now we also got support for using these intermediate certificates, which is really great because it enables support for even more certificate types and vendors, as we'll get back to in a moment. But now we got the certificate installed, and then the different clients, Pro, Advanced, Go, can connect to the database engine and verify that that connection between the client and the server is secure, because we have the certificate, the signed certificate from the certificate authority that says, hey, this FileMaker server is actually who they say they are, because that's stamped into the certificate. So these native clients are connecting to the database engine, and then we have WebDirect, which is connecting to the web server, the Apache or IIS, and validating that connection via the certificate that is installed on the web server part, which, by the way, FileMaker Server Admin Console takes care of in this installation process. But not only that, if you're using custom web publishing, PHP or XML for that matter, you will connect via the web server as well, which is also using the certificate, or at least that is if you're using the HTTPS protocol. The same goes actually for WebDirect. You can connect via HTTP or HTTPS, and the S stands for secure, or you could say it stands for SSL. So this is basically how the certificates work with FileMaker. Now, what we are going to is we need to show how the process works. We need to install the certificates on FileMaker server, which has some steps to it. So just before I'm showing the actual process with the admin console, I'm just going to step through the process of this. So first of all, we need to ask the FileMaker server to create something called a certificate request. The certificate request is generating two files on the server. It generates a server key, which is a private key that is used in order to unlock the certificate and install the certificates. The key is also encrypted within the certificate request, or some of it is, in order to make sure that the certificate request and the signed certificate will match the server key when it gets installed. So it tries to ensure that on the way from you to the vendor you're going to purchase your SSL certificates from, that nothing goes on in that process where you would end up with a false certificate and get that installed on your server and then got compromised. So these two files gets created. Then you are sending the request file to the certificate authority or the reseller, or where you need to or want to purchase your certificate. After you have sent this certificate request file to where you purchase it and pay for the certificate and select the type of certificate you want, then you will receive a signed certificate from the certificate authority. So now you got the signed certificate. You already have the server key sitting on the FileMaker server, so now we just need to install the certificate. And that goes with the signed certificate that you receive from the certificate authority, as well as the server key that is sitting on the FileMaker server that we originally created. And then FileMaker server will install your certificates on both the FileMaker server database engine and the web server as well. At least that is the case when you are running a one-machine deployment, which is what we are talking about here. If you're running a two-machine deployment, you are probably so advanced that you know how to install on the web server machine. And then the connections are now secure when the certificates are installed. So this is the process that we need to run through in order to install the SSL certificate on FileMaker server. Some of the new things in FileMaker server 15 in regards of SSL certificates is right awesome, to say it at least. And one of the really great additions is that we now got support for wildcard SSL certificates. So wildcards is actually where you can use, you put in a star.mycompany.com. So that means that you can have multiply servers, or you can have multiply addresses that result to the same server using subdomains. And subdomain is the part you can put in front of your domain and then separate with a dot. So like the examples here, server01.mycompany.com or server02, or it could be WD for web direct, for example, or it could be whatever you want to put in. And the great thing with the wildcards here is that now you can actually point several subdomains to the same server, and it will respond, and it will verify the SSL certificate as valid as long as you have the same domain name at the end. And this is something that is really great. And not only that, if you have multiply servers, like this example suggests that you have server 1, 2, and 3, you can actually use the same certificate on multiply servers. That is, you can purchase the certificate once, and then you can make the certificate signing request multiply times, one for each server, and then you can request a signed certificate from your vendor. Most vendors allow you to reissue the certificate. The first time you purchase the certificate, and then you reissue a certificate. And when you reissue the certificate, you submit the signed certificate request that you generate from, in this case, the FileMaker server. So this will really keep the cost of certificates down, especially when you have multiply servers that you need to install certificates onto. And it makes a lot of things much easier. And for example, for web directs, I've seen a number of things where you have different smaller solutions as a part of a large solution. For example, you have an events registration system, and you have other types of things. And then you can just create a secure subdomain that resolves to the same machine, but for example, goes directly into the web direct file. So it looks much more professional that way, and it will render valid at this point. So that is wildcard certificates, which is something that is really awesome. And they are not all that expensive. One thing that came to my attention a couple of days ago is that apparently not all vendors of these wildcard certificates allows you to install certificates on multiply servers. So you should probably look out for those conditions when you purchase your wildcard certificate. So another type of certificates that is newly supported in FileMaker Server 15 is SAN certificate. So SAN certificate is a special type where you can have several domain names. Now remember the slide before where I showed you that you could have a wildcard as long as you have the same domain name. So mydomain.com needed to be the domain name, and then in front of that you could have multiple things. Now, if you have several domain names, it could, for example, be .com and .net and .org. Those are three different domain names. You can get those together into a SAN SSL certificate. However, there will be a common name or something called the server name. That is what the users will see if they look at the certificate. So that means you could use it for alternate trade names for your company, for example. But it's not a good thing for using, for example, multiply customers, because you can see all the names in the certificate, so they are not hidden. And when you look at it, like this example with the GeoTrust, they have an SSL certificate that is showing that the common name or the server name is www.geotrust.com, and then in the extension, the subject alternative name, which is the abbreviation SAN stands for, you can see it's resolved also to geotrust.net and geotrust.com, as well as the geotrust.com with three W's in front of that. So in this example, it's a perfect example of where you have multiplied domain names, for example, because you want to have .com, .org, .net, whatever, but you have the same company name, and no matter how your users get into the server using either of these domain names, the certificate will validate. Now, make sure that you read on FileMaker's knowledge base which certificates that is supported. And especially with these wildcard certificates and the SAN certificates, it's a little bit difficult to know exactly if it's supported. I know that the Rapid SSL certificate, wildcard certificate, is actually supported, even though you might not find that directly on the supported list. With the SAN names, I have not yet tried to install a SAN certificate, so I'm not perfectly sure which one is supported here. Now we also have the intermediate certificates, like I showed you. So the intermediate certificate is a link between the root and your custom certificate. It's established something called a chain of trust. So if the intermediate is absent from the chain, then your certificate is not necessarily trusted. So in the example that I'm going to show you in a bit, where we do the actual installation of a certificate with a wildcard certificate, the intermediate certificate is really needed here. Otherwise, you'll see that it is encrypted and you can see that there is a certificate, but a chain of trust is broken, because if we don't have the intermediate certificate installed as well. So, like I said before, the intermediate certificate is kind of a reseller certificate issued by a root. So you could compare it to, if you're a FileMaker reseller, you need to be certified to be a FileMaker reseller, which is right now called the FBA reseller, and you need to undergo some training in order to be certified to be a reseller. So it's kind of the same thing here. And even root certificate authorities is using the intermediate certificates to enhance the security and protect the root certificate, just like I talked about. There has been some incidents in the past where a certificate authority got their root certificate compromised, and that had really huge consequences for the customers who bought their certificates, because that security was now broken when they lost their root. So that's what the intermediate is. So basically here I have logged into the FileMaker Server 15 admin console right on the server itself where it's installed. And the first thing, it's newly installed server, and nothing is really set up yet. So the first thing we are going to is the database server area and into the security tab. Now this part is looking pretty much like it does in FileMaker Server 14, except for the parts down where you can create a request right in here. So that will be the first thing we are going to do. We are going to create the certificate request by clicking on that button. Okay, so here we get the new dialog where we can fill in the certificate signing request. And here is the first field is the domain name, or it's also referred to as common name. So right here I'm going to enter the name, the domain name that I need to create a certificate for. As I'm going to create a wildcard certificate, I need to start with a star dot my domain name instead of the actual server name. And that is a little bit different from how you create certificates normally. If it's just a single certificate for a specific server, you enter the entire domain name, which is also referred as common name. And then of course you need to fill in the company name. That is required. You can also fill in organization, city, state or province. You can fill out if that's relevant. And then the 2-letter country code, which is the ISO country code, which you can Google if you don't know yours. And then at the bottom here, you need to set a password for the private key file. So the private key file that the server is generating in this process, you need to put in a password for that. So I'm just going to enter a password here. And then I need to confirm the password and make sure that you can remember this password. So now everything is filled out and I'm ready to create the certificate with this information, which is basically going to be encoded directly into the server request file, which is created now. And FileMaker has put in some more guidance here, so you can see what you need to do. And from the web browser you can actually download the certificate request file. So you don't need to do this process directly on the server. I just tend to use it to do this on the server itself, because when we need to install the certificate we are going to need the server key as well. But basically now we have created the request and then we need to move on in the process. And just to show you, here is the server request file, which is basically just a text file. And as you can see, I've also opened the FileMaker server folder with the C store, where you can see the server request file is sitting in the same location. This is actually the same file as the one I downloaded. They are totally identical. And then just next to it we got the server key. So basically these two files are the one that is created in this process of requesting a certificate. So the certificate is actually just something you can open directly with a text editor. And right here I'm just opening text edit, and there you can see the certificate request, which is a block of text encoded in base 64 encoding, and it has some encrypted keys and information as well. But basically the formula we just filled out in the server admin console, those information you filled out there, along with some information about the server key, is encoded within a base 64 encoding right here. And for some SSL resellers, you need to take this actual block. I know my local SSL pusher wants me to paste this block of text right into their website. So some resellers probably want you to upload the actual file, the server request file, and some will ask you to take this block of text and insert on their website. So just open it in a text editor and copy that block of text and provide that to your SSL provider. So this is the first part, and now I'm obviously going to the SSL reseller's website and order the certificate, providing this server request information in order for them to be able to create a signed certificate. Okay, so now we have obtained the signed certificate from the vendor where we purchased the certificate, and actually I just got it in an email, not as a file but as a block of text that is totally similar. So now I'm just opening the text editor, and on Macintosh, when you're using this default text editor, you need to make sure that it is actually just plain text and not rich text. When you open this, the format by default is rich text. So make sure that you're under the format menu, make plain text in order to change the format to just plain text. And then I can paste it in here, and as you can see, the signed certificate looks very similar to the certificate signing request that we saw just before. So this is the actually certificate. Now I'm going to save this one on the desktop, and you can pretty much name it whatever you want. I just tend to want to name it what it is, and then I'm not using dots but I'm using underscores just in order to make sure that nothing gets hiccuped up with the operating system. And then I'm using .cer for the file extension for a certificate. And then I'm going to save this on the desktop. And as you can see, now I got the certificates out on the desktop, and somehow this operating system wants to hide the extension, so I just like to take that off so I can see the file extension. So here's the signed certificate that we'll need in order to install it, and we also have the server key that we generated before that is also needed in the installation process. So now we are going into the admin console again, and we need to enable the SSL certificate in order to be able to import the certificates. And now we got the warning saying that if you enable the SSL, then you need to make sure that you install a custom certificate. So right now I need to save the change that the SSL is enabled, and then we get a warning saying that we should restart the FileMaker server. But we don't want to do that before we have imported the certificate. So the import certificate dialog enables us to select the signed certificate, the one that we actually just saved on the desktop. So right now I'm going to select that from the desktop. There it was. And now we have the certificate. Then I need to select the private key, and the private key was within the library FileMaker server and C store, at least on the Mac, and it is in the C store folder, and there's the server key. So I need to select that one as well, and then we got the ability to include an intermediate certificate. And basically that one is also being used when FileMaker server is generating the custom certificate. So it's an important part. And here I have just saved that intermediate on the desktop, which is in this case the Rapid SSL intermediate certificate file. Now I didn't show you where I got that from, but it depends on the vendor and the different kind of certificate that you choose to purchase. So in this case I got the intermediate certificate from Rapid SSL's website, where you can just search for it and find it and download the intermediate certificate. Some vendors actually also email that intermediate certificate. Some is like a real file, or it could be like the signed certificate file, and you create the actual file yourself, just like we did with the certificate file. So the last step of the process is to enter the private key password. So that's the password that we generated during the certificate signing request just before, and I enter that. And now FileMaker is going to import this and create the certificates and install both on the database engine and the web server. So that was fairly fast, and FileMaker is showing a warning that you need to restart the FileMaker service or FileMaker background processes. In theory, it should be enough to restart the database engine, but I've seen that in order to make it work all along, you should really restart the entire machine. One other thing to notice here is that you should enable the SSL for progressive downloading as well. So that means for progressive downloading is when you have remote container content in a database solution or in a file where let's say you have a movie in a container field. FileMaker can handle progressive downloading where it streams the content of the container field directly, so you can start watching the movie before it's actually downloaded in whole. But you should enable the SSL as well, so everything that goes from the server to the clients and back is encrypted and secured via the SSL protocol over the wire. So that is the last thing to do here, and then we are going to make a restart of the server itself.
Excellent.
So now I have restarted the FileMaker server, the entire machine, and just going back to the admin console, you can see everything is running. Everything is perfectly fine, and going into the database and the security tab, everything looks like it used to be. And you can actually view the certificate that is installed right here as well, which is a nice little feature. But let's look at the web browser on my machine. So I've navigated to the actual site, which is named lcs09.lavent.com, and as you can see, when we show the certificate is valid, but the domain name or common name is star.lavent.com, but it's valid because it's a wildcard certificate, and you get the padlock in the browser line. So here you can see the information about the certificate itself and also when it expires. And if we look down at the details, we can actually see down here when I mentioned something about subject alternative names, SAN names. When you get a wildcard certificate, you actually also get something in the SAN area, because star.lavent.com in this case is the domain name, so everything you replace the star with will validate, but it also validates the lavent.com without a subdomain as valid. So this certificate is useful for both, even though it's not technical, the same thing with subdomains and domain. They will validate correctly because in the certificate there is a note about that right here. So when we're going into FileMaker, now remember I was talking about local area network. So right now there is a list of local servers that are within my local area network at this time, and as you can see, the LCS09 is actually here. The reason that FileMaker Pro or Pro Advanced can see the server or servers that reside on your local area network is due to a service that is called Bonjour. Now, the Bonjour protocol or service is something that is created by Apple, and it is has been a part of the Mac platform for many years, and is intended in order to help users to not have a lot of problems finding servers or printers or all kind of these things. So this is a service that helps you with that. And that's the reason why FileMaker Pro can see these servers. Now the problem is though that, as you can see when I hover here, it shows the local IP address. So if I open the file here and bring it in, you can see that there is a padlock down at the bottom, but it's gray, it's not green. So if we just bring up a data viewer here, and there is some function here, you can see the connection state is 2, which means that the connection is encrypted and using SSL, but FileMaker Pro is not able to validate that the server is actually who it says it is. So in this case, the server is lcs09.lavent.com, and the certificate says that such domain name is valid, but we are connecting through the local IP address, and the local IP address is not included within the certificate. In fact, you cannot include an IP address in the certificate. So we need to connect to the server via the what is called fully qualified domain name. So that is in this case lcs09.lavent.com. Yeah, what we need to do here is that we need to create a favorite host and use the fully qualified domain name like this one here. Otherwise, the Bonjour protocol will connect us via the local IP address, or it will use the .local protocol, which is basically the same thing. So now I just open the file here, and as you can see, when we connect with the fully qualified domain name, full name of the server, you get the green padlock. So that means that FileMaker is able to verify that the connection is secure and the certificate is valid. So right now we have installed the certificate, we have validated and verified that it is valid through the web browser. It's valid also in FileMaker Pro, Pro Advanced, and that goes the same for FileMaker Go as well. So just remember the thing that you probably need to add a favorite host to the launch center if you are connecting to local servers. Otherwise, you will probably need to provide other means of connecting to the server if you're doing that via WAN. So that was basically the process of installing the SSL certificate. We've heard in the past that, this was a cumbersome process, but actually I think FileMaker has cut it down to what's really possible to cut it down to. A lot of great enhancements has gone into WebDirect as a result of new technology. However, if you do not have installed the custom certificate, this technology cannot be used. So there will be fallback on to other technology. So in short, this will effectively mean that if you install the custom certificate, not only do you get better security because it's encrypted and verified encrypted, but your WebDirect solutions will also perform better because the technology, the new technology that has gone into the WebDirect is being able to be utilized when running via a secure connection.
Excellent. Well, I know people may have questions, so if they have a question, well, how should they contact you, Klaus? I mean, tell us about your business.
Well, we have a company called Datamanics where we create custom solutions and custom consulting. In addition to that, we just launched the Brain Basket just around Christmas, and that is actually meant to be a site for the community where we share information, videos, and tools. So on this side, we'll see that we are going to make a post with this video as well, and it's possible to ask questions here. Otherwise, you can also contact me through our website where there's the contact area. I am also participating in DevCon's FileMaker events around the year, and this year I will of course be in Las Vegas again.
Excellent. Now, one of the things that comes up all the time is people needing to organize, the information about their servers. I mean, if they only have one FileMaker server, it's pretty straightforward, but people start to have to manage more than one FileMaker server. It can be somewhat tedious to keep all that information organized. And I was told that you have an answer for this.
Yeah. Well, we just released a native iOS app for managing FileMaker servers that runs on your iPad. So basically now you can take your iPad to the beach and then you can manage all your FileMaker servers. Sounds great, right?
That is super cool.
Yeah.
Super cool.
So you can
so you can download it from the app store for the iPhone, iPad, right?
Yeah. It's actually only for the iPad. But then we have also released the FileMaker version of this tool, which is what I have right here. And it's very easy to add servers. You can enter names and numbers and what's operating system and who's the client, or it could be which department or whatever it is. You can store information about the operating system user. You can even store the password both for FileMaker server and the operating system, but be careful because you need to protect those. So think twice before you do that. And then you can store all information about the certificate. So actually the certificate we just went through, I have created a certificate here, the star alias with this information. If you want to use the terminal command or need to do that for FileMaker Server 14, for example, then you get terminal commands right here. As well, you can set the validity period. And you can also paste the actual certificate content. So here's for the certificate request, the certificate file, the intermediate file, and also the server key. And you can also save the actual files within this place. So this tool actually gives you a great way of managing your servers. But actually not only that, we can also access the FileMaker admin console right from within this tool, which means that you don't need to connect to multiply servers, or you can do that within this tool. And this native FileMaker file will be available for free. It will be locked down, so you cannot change the content of it, but you can use it as it is.
Excellent. And where can they download this file at?
This is on the brainbasket.com.
Brainbasket.com. All right. I greatly appreciate everyone watching this video. If you have questions about security, SSL, FileMaker matters, feel free to email myself at support@rcconsulting.com or Klaus Levent at datamanix.com. And we're happy to answer your questions, and we'll be seeing you at the FileMaker Developer Conference.